Hello and welcome to Bread and Rosaries, the UK-based leftist Christian podcast, which recently discovered that there is a right direction to vomit on the side of a motorway. I'm Ben Molyneux
Wow.
Hetherington, and I'm joined by Adam Spears. Adam, do you know how to motorway vomit correctly?
That's lovely. That's an image I did not need in my mind. Thank you for that. I don't vomit very much, but my one sort of claim to kind of look a little bit badass is that on my very first driving lesson, my driving instructor made me pull over at the side of the road, and she got out and vomited, which sounds really cool until you realise that she was heavily pregnant.
Okay. You don't drive though, do you? Is that related? Is that
Yeah, well, it's mostly because I didn't have any money after that, and then later on, I decided to ride a motorbike because it made more sense. So I'd ride a motorbike, but I don't drive a car.
yeah? So
Which I guess is the other thing that makes me look cooler than I actually am.
yeah, I don't know. I think it might be too late in the day for motorbikes to be cool anymore. I'm afraid it is middle-aged dads now, isn't it? That is the
Yeah, middle-aged dads and racists. When the crossover between those two is basically a circle.
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah, just to go back, it turns out that if you're feeling unwell on a very long drive from Cornwall, and you pull over at the side of a motorway because you suddenly realise you are going to be sick imminently, you really should try and move with the traffic, because if you then throw up facing the oncoming traffic,
oh,
it just kind of blows back at you.
yeah. How did you not know that?
I wasn't very well at the time. I mean, I wasn't really thinking anything other than, please, I don't want to be sick in the car, which I wasn't. But the other great thing about this is that I pulled over in one of those like emergency areas, when they don't have a hard shoulder, but they have like an emergency area, which means that someone will have to review the footage to decide if it was an appropriate use of the emergency area, because you can get fined if not, and they take video of it, which means that someone somewhere has had to review the footage of me throwing up and having it blow back into my face. Happy Monday to that person, I guess.
Apparently, I don't know if I think so. I never met him, but my great granddad, he just had this thing where if anyone was sick at all, or there was any sick in the area, or anything like that, he smelt sick, anything like that, he would just immediately be sick himself.
Right? Yeah.
I'm hoping that doesn't happen to the person who has to review that footage.
Oh yeah, that's a horrible chain of events.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, I'm sorry to that person. What a disgusting start to the podcast. I can only apologise.
Yeah.
As ever, we make this a podcast really easy to get into for new listeners. So if this is your first episode, I promise vomiting is not one of our major themes of the podcast. We don't talk about vomiting that much, I swear. Something we do, however, talk about a fair bit is the ongoing issues in Palestine, which is going to be the topic of today's conversation. So we're going to talk a little bit about how things are going over there, some of the Christian response to that, particularly in light of the fact that we are just past, as we record, the anniversary of the 7th of October attacks. So everyone and their aunt has been doing reflective pieces and putting out their thoughts on what's happened, and so we thought we'd belatedly jump on that bandwagon. Before we do that, however, we start, as always, with what else is on my mind, Grapes.
What else is on my mind, Grapes?
And I have something on my mind, Grapes, Adam. It has been triggered by the upcoming, as we record, I don't know how long it'll take to edit, so it might be past, but the upcoming Super League Grand Final, which is between Hull KR and Wigan. I know, but it is going somewhere. I'm not just going to talk about that. Yeah.
I love how you love to pretend at being a northerner.
I mean, I don't think I've ever claimed to be a northerner. No. But
Sorry, say that again.
I've never claimed to be a northerner. I am deeply southern.
I feel like you definitely have at points. Like, you remember I lived with you for what? Not quite a year, but like a while. And I feel like you definitely made claims at that point to being a northerner, or at least an honorary northerner.
See, I don't think so. I think I've always been quite southern and
Okay.
like aggressively so. Like,
I mean, obviously, I take the mick, but I do respect the choice of code of rugby for its class kind of.
yeah, obviously,
Yeah, yeah. Even though I myself, I mean, I've never really known much about any form of rugby actually, but I do enjoy Union a little bit just because that's the one that's on TV sometimes. So
yeah, true. Although these days it's all hidden away on pay per view like
well,
with
yeah, I mean,
subscription.
look, let's be honest. What I'm really talking about is I watched the final of the 2003 World Cup.
Oh right,
That's
yeah,
what
sure, yeah.
yeah. So we are going back over 20 years. Oh goodness, I can't believe that's. I remember I had a friend from school, amazingly, and I used to go to this thing at his church after school, and it was only us two, maybe one other in the building, completely clear of all the chairs and stuff. And it was shortly after the World Cup, and we decided for some reason to reenact the drop goal from Johnny Wilkinson with his phone.
Oh,
And
okay, that's a bold decision.
well, he did it. He booted this phone up in the air, and I think someone else actually, those things that you pick the chairs up with and wheel them across and whatever.
Sure, yeah.
Someone else ran towards it with that, and it just shattered on this thing. And
Yeah.
it being 2003, of course, phones were indestructible, and he just picked it up and put it back together.
Yeah, true.
Yeah.
Yeah. Anyway, going back for
Yeah.
that incredible tangent. In the build-up, there has been so increased media coverage. Particularly Sky Sports are showing the game, so their kind of media coverage has tried to do a bit of focus on it. But in newspapers and stuff as well. And there's a euphemism that keeps coming up, which it takes various forms, but people keep talking about the players who have had difficult exits from former clubs. In this case, it is two players, one of whom's difficult exit involved getting charged with assault, and the other of whom a difficult exit was getting convicted of sexual offences. So,
Not ideal. Not ideal.
and I just can't get my head around how every sports journalist I see seems reluctant to just be honest about these players. And you see it a lot with. There was a Premier League player. It was last year, I believe, wasn't it? Who was arrested on rape charges.
I mean, look, there's been so many.
But so this one in particular hasn't officially been named. So coverage cannot name him. Everyone knows who he is. If you don't, 10 seconds on Google.
I don't know who he is. I haven't come across this story, so you might have to tell me and bleep his name.
Okay, so it's Arsenal's who continued.
Oh, really?
Everyone knows it was him. He was arrested. Continues to play,
but there's a gagging order or whatever.
He's not officially been named, so they can't. No one's reporting it.
Wow. Okay, so what we can do is talk around it without saying his actual name.
Yeah. So yeah, this player has been arrested for rape charges. Has not formally been charged yet, I believe, and is free to continue playing, but isn't allowed to leave the country. So every time that the team in question play abroad, there is all sorts of coverage that just says that for some reason this player won't be travelling. And at least you can kind of see, well, they're trying to get around the fact. I mean, it would be better not to mention it at all, but they're trying to get around the fact that you're not allowed to specifically name this player as the person who's been accused, right? So I think that's slightly cowardly, but okay, fine. But then you got the case of Cristiano Ronaldo. And at the last Euros, everyone was talking about the fact that this would be Cristiano Ronaldo's last major tournament, that would be, without mentioning the reason why, which is, of course, that next year's World Cup is going to be played in the US, a country that Ronaldo cannot enter without immediately getting arrested on his outstanding rape charges there.
No wonder he went to Saudi Arabia, then, right?
Yeah,
Rather than the MLS.
rather than the American League. Yeah. And again, this is a known fact. This is publicly known. This is available information, and yet no one ever wants to talk about it. And, I understand people, journalists can't print and say that he is a rapist, for example, but they are absolutely entitled to print and announce publicly that he cannot enter the US without being arrested, because that is a statement of fact. And it is also a statement of fact that since that has been the case, he has avoided going to the US, including when he was playing for Man U, when Man U did a tour of the US in pre-season, and he didn't attend it. And I just don't understand why sports journalists are such cowards, or why sports media is so cowardly, because everyone knows this. There are people who would say, "Oh, this is just jealous women or gold diggers trying to," and those people are obviously scum, and we, condemn them. But there are people who might think that. There is no one who disagrees that Ronaldo has outstanding rape charges against him in the US. That is universally accepted at this point. And and you get obviously this smaller scale stuff where actually there's a really interesting opportunity. One of the guys who was talked about a difficult exit from his rugby league club, it was an assault charge when he was a young player and he was out drinking. He kind of had to rebuild his career from there. He actually was amateur for a little bit and has kind of rebuilt his career. And there was an opportunity there for him to reflect on that experience, on what he's learned, on his take public accountability for his failures, and to talk about actually what it means to be a young man with the world at your feet, and to make some awful choices and to do some unacceptable things, and actually for him to try and make amends for that. But actually, whether he is willing to do that or not, I don't know. But there's no interest in actually allowing him to talk about that experience. It's all just brushed under the carpet. So yeah, that's what's been on my mind, Grapes, is the way in which criminal acts, and it is particularly, it must be said, violence against women. All the cases I've just mentioned involve violence against women in some form.
Yeah.
It's just kind of brushed under the carpet. And, women's sports have made huge strides. And get increased visibility, and that's really exciting. But actually, while male players are still essentially allowed to be unaccountable for violence towards women, it's hard to say that much progress has really been made.
So I agree with everything you've just said. The only thing I would say that maybe I don't agree with is that it's just sports journalists. I think it's just like most mainstream journalists in general. Like if someone like has money, power, that kind of thing, or in the case of these sports people, I think probably the fact that they have like a whole club and like league and stuff to back them up, and
lawyers,
there are lots, and lawyers, yeah, like there's lots of things in place to back them up. But I think like most mainstream journalists are kind of cowardly on this kind of thing, because you look at the stuff. I mean, you've mentioned it before, the stuff that gets printed in America about William Windsor and what's her face,
Catherine.
Kate. Well, yeah, she became Catherine after they got married, because you can't be called Kate because that's a shortened form of the. I just hate all that stuff. Like the fact that they made her have elocution lessons, for goodness sake, and she's already quite posh.
I mean, we'd probably benefit from some elocution lessons. The listener feedback is probably going to be, you guys should get some of those as well. Right?
If you're listening to us and you want us to have elocution lessons, you're listening to the wrong podcast. But do you know what I mean? Like, I hate all this rubbish that they sort of make them do, where it's things like elocution lessons and having to be called Catherine rather than Kate. It's just like inventing a posh persona for someone who, yeah, as I say, is already quite posh. But like, why do you need to do it? It's just all lies and mirrors and a facade. It's nonsense. But also, of course, there are certain claims from journalists in the US about William and Kate that aren't printed over here.
Yeah.
So,
and I think, you were saying individual journalists, but actually reality is this is probably more of a reflection of newspapers and media entities, right?
Yeah,
rather than
maybe.
Actually, even if you were a journalist who wanted to publish and say, we know this is Ronaldo's last World Cup because he's got outstanding rape charges in the US.
Yeah.
You're probably not going to be allowed to print that. And I don't know whether that's because people are scared of legal action, which they shouldn't be because that's a statement of fact, or whether there's a sense that they just don't want to. And this is why I think I'm particularly interested in sports media. There's always this thing about, actually, we just do the sports and we avoid politics and all the rest of it. And actually, I think in recent years, there's been a huge shift around that. And, most mainstream sports media organizations will absolutely publish stuff that leads into political questions of identity, all this sort of stuff, and yet still naming the truth about players and violence against women is not something that they're prepared to do at all.
I think an important question about how much this is A, in the culture, and B, sort of interacts with that, how much it forms part of the culture around this kind of thing. And one of the ways I think into thinking about that is looking at the example of Mason Greenwood, because a lot of people, obviously, I mean, we know what he did, right? Because you can hear it. And the reason, like, it's obviously a very complicated situation. We don't know the ins and outs of what happened after that. But what we do know is that he definitely did the bad stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And
so this is Mason Greenwood, the Man United football player, or
former Man United
football player, who was accused of domestic violence.
Yeah, I mean, it was worse than that. I think he was accused of rape.
Yeah,
and
there was audio evidence that strongly supported the case against him. The charges were eventually dropped, and he was quietly shipped off to Italy.
Spain, I think, but so they were dropped, but they were dropped because his partner, who had gone to the police in the first place, decided to drop the charges.
Yeah.
And so the police couldn't continue with the...
Yeah, and there's all sorts of reasons someone might do that. It doesn't in any way demonstrate that those were false accusations.
So there's obviously some complicated stuff about their relationship there, but like the evidence is pretty damning. But what's fascinating about that is when you see things about Mason Greenwood online, obviously there's plenty of people who are like, what this guy did is terrible and we don't want him at this club and so on and so forth. There's also a lot of people who are like, oh, everyone does things wrong and, we should give him another chance. And some people just getting like really angry about it and just backing him 100%, or just being like, well, the charges were dropped and all the rest of it. And I think obviously that says something about the culture around this kind of thing, that a lot of people are just ready to completely let people off the hook if they, well, certainly if they're a decent footballer, but also often if they're a man who's committed an act of violence against a woman. But there's also something about, I was listening to, have you ever heard of Utah Phillips?
Yes.
Okay. So for anyone who hasn't, Utah Phillips was an American folk singer, a member of the Wobblies, the IWW, Industrial Workers of the World, and an anarchist. And I was listening to some of his stuff, and he was telling a story. And one of the things he said was that a particular person who I'm not going to name because I'm actually going to do them as a saint of the week at a later date, taught him never again to outsource his opinion on who counted as an enemy to the state. And I think actually that's not dissimilar to what's going on here, because the state decide not to pursue charges because the partner has decided not to. And so they're like, well, fine, as if the judicial system is perfect.
We'll move on now, but I do want to recommend to people a great article from Defector. I'm going to say a terrible word now, but it is an American website, so I do apologise for this, but the article is entitled, Why is Soccer's most famous scoopster doing... well, it's a good article, so we'll give it a pass this one time. Why is soccer's most famous scoopster doing PR work for Mason Greenwood, talking about Fabrizio Romano? I would say, sorry for pronouncing your name wrong, but you're also doing PR work for a rapist. So, but anyway, it's a good article talking about the way...
too far off.
Yeah. the way that transfer gossip, scoop journalism, sports journalism as it's known, kind of interacts, and why it kind of ends at a point as someone who's most famous for doing transfer gossip is kind of doing a bunch of tweets praising Mason Greenwood's performances. So yeah, well worth the read, and it kind of gets to the heart of what we're talking about a little bit. However, we do have an audience of limp-wristed lefty wimps who are probably sick of us talking about sports for this long. So we probably should move on.
I just say, I feel like we attack a lot of people on this podcast. Let's be honest. I don't think we need to like attack our own audience because like we won't have anyone left.
True. We love you guys. You're doing great. Yeah, we'll stop talking about sports now. I promise. Shall we move on, Adam, to our main topic of the day?
Yeah, let's do it.
So, as we record today, it is the 10th of October. So, we're a few days past the anniversary of the 7th of October attacks last year. That has led to an outpouring of kind of responses to that. I don't think we need to tell people what the 7th of October attacks were. We've talked about kind of Palestine issues at length since that's happened. And obviously, what it marks, as well as the anniversary of a year since those attacks, is a year of what seems to be ever increasing violence and oppression towards actually not just the Palestinians, but increasingly Lebanon and other Arab states in the area. So it is an anniversary of a year of great suffering and great moral failings on behalf of our leadership, both as British people and as Christians. Yeah, we want to dig into that a little bit. And I think we want to talk a little bit about a letter that was written to mark the anniversary. And it was written by some of the kind of big name faith leaders in the country. However, before we get on to the letter itself and who it was actually signed by, I want to note who it was organised by. And this links back a little bit to Mingrapes, because it was organised by the something called the Together Coalition. Adam, you look confused.
Do I?
You just suddenly you looked up and started typing as I said that.
Yeah, I'm just getting their website up.
Good luck. Their website is down. Yeah.
Presumably, something has happened.
Well, not exactly. So the Together Coalition, their main thing is that they did a big event for the last few years for basic councils and local organisations to say thank you to people who volunteered for stuff during COVID. So they're a kind of a coalition of different organisations. I've really struggled to find much information about them because their website is down. It is not clear anywhere that they are the ones organising it. However, they're quoted in the Guardian article about the letter, and they've also been tweeting out excerpts on the letter on their kind of stationery set, with their logo and everything on it. So it appears to me that this is the coalition that have arranged it. If not, they're certainly inserting themselves into the narrative around it. And the reason that links back to our Mingrapes is that the person who is listed as the co-founder of the Together Coalition is one Brendan Cox, most famous for being the husband of the murdered MP Jo Cox, who set up a bunch of charities in her name and then got booted out of all of them when it turns out they had a history of sexual impropriety in professional roles.
Shocking. It's I don't know. I'm trying to do a bit, but like it's just like, why is this story always the case? This just happens again and again and again.
Yeah, and just like why this guy's literally only famous because of his wife. So yeah, that is the initial context for this letter, which isn't the most auspicious start to any letter that I've ever heard. Adam, would you like to tell us something about the content of the letter itself?
I mean, I could just read it. It's not long. So it starts, it has been a year since the brutal Hamas terrorist attacks in Israel and the start of this devastating war in Gaza and beyond. During this time, the scale of human suffering has been horrific. As people of faith from Christian, Jewish, and Muslim communities in the UK, While we may hold different views about aspects of the conflict, we stand united in our grief and in our belief that our shared humanity must bring us together. Our faiths and our humanity teach us that we should mourn for all the innocent people who have lost their lives. In these challenging times, we must also reject those who seek to divide us. Anti-Jewish hate and anti-Muslim hate have no place in the UK today. We must stand together against prejudice and hatred in all its forms. The UK has long been a model of different communities and religions getting along with each other.
Citation needed.
Yeah. We commit to upholding and nurturing this proud tradition. Signed, a bunch of people. Shall I read them out?
Well, we'll get to the people in a minute, I think.
Okay.
I want to unpick the content of the letter a little bit first.
Yeah.
Because I think on one level, it's hard to find much to disagree with. And that's because it's so tepid that it's barely saying anything other than it would be nice if we all got along, wouldn't it?
But it is deeply ideological, though. You know, like as soon as the eighth word is brutal.
Yes,
you know,
I picked it up on immediately. Yeah,
was it brutal? Yes, but as soon as you are using that kind of language, you're introducing an element of judgment there, which is not, it's not to say that those things were brutal or that we want that to happen or anything like that. But it is to say that the very first thing is that you're framing this as A, starting at that point, and B, being as a result of this sort of isolated, brutal thing that this terrorist group did. And not at any point does it say Israel, which it mentions obviously immediately afterwards, has done anything wrong, that was what they've been doing is terrorism or anything like that, because only non-state actors can be terrorists. And even though Hamas run the Gaza Strip, they're not considered a legitimate state actor, so they can be terrorists, but Israel can't.
We talk about the passive voice in reporting around the conflict as Israelis get killed by groups and people, whereas Palestinians find themselves dead with no known cause of it.
Yeah, like how did that happen?
Yeah, and I think there's an element of that at play here, because actually the language is the brutal Hamas terrorist attacks and the start of this devastating war. And I think there's two things there. Obviously, there's that difference between a terrorist attack and a war. And, I do think that there are differences between the Hamas actions and the Israeli actions. However, actually, in the traditional sense, arguably it was an army of invaders, not a terrorist attack on the 7th of October. There was a bunch of people, a group of organised armed people crossing a border and committing acts of violence.
It was a group of organised armed people who were members and representatives of the elected authority of the region, arguably country, in which they were members, So, like, at what point? I mean, I don't like or agree with what they did.
I was going to say, please don't misunderstand us as saying that's a good thing. But actually, as you said, to call that a terrorist attack is a deeply ideological decision based on who and who is not legitimate. But then, as you said, the word brutal acts are carried out by brutes. There is a specific person there, and they're being described as morally unconscionable. Whereas devastating things, acts of nature can be devastating. People describe dropping their phone and the screen cracking as devastating. There was no moral judgment around the cause of something that's devastating. And on one level you might say, oh, you guys are just picking up, on little things. But let me tell you that this piece of writing, as short as it is, has been through so many people, through so many reviews, and I think it is really telling what language is eventually deemed acceptable to all the people involved. Now, I mentioned it as we went through, Adam, but the other thing that really struck me was the idea that we have always been a country that has been a model of different communities and religions getting along with each other. How on earth did that statement get in there?
I think there's a difference between a place having a lower than average or lower than many other examples kind of rate of religious tension, which I think, you can make an argument for the UK compared to some places, but there's a difference between that and saying, therefore, this is a model of how to do it. It's not a model of how to do it. For it to be a model of how to do it, you'd have to do a lot better than we do. And at the moment, I mean, we have a long history actually of stoking up, especially at the moment.
Well, yeah, and that's what struck me is how can you say that after a summer of far right riots?
Yeah.
Like, what are you talking about? If this is the model, God Almighty, how bad is everywhere else? Like, and I think you're right. To some, there are places that do have more, at least overt forms of community issues like that. But as I say, we've just had riots over the summer. Anti-immigrant rhetoric is becoming more and more important in political discourse. Like to say that, yeah, this is a model for, inter-community relations is laughable, really. And the other thing I thought is, do you know where was really a true model for a diverse community of people all living in harmony together? Palestine pre the 20th century. You know, before we stuck a settler colonial state in there, actually, yeah, Palestine was a very diverse community of people without major conflicts between those diverse groupings. But yeah, we're probably not allowed to talk about that.
I think that's a case that can be overstated, but it's broadly true. There were tensions at times, but we're talking over a period of centuries. We're not talking about over the course of 100 years, or even 20 years. We're talking about what happened over the course of, almost a millennium.
Yeah. So why don't you tell us who signed this completely pointless statement then, Adam?
Okay, so we have got Imam. I'm sorry if I get any of these names wrong, by the way, which is almost certain. Imam Kari.
Well be.
Yeah, I might get that one right. I'll give it a go. So we've got Imam Kari Muhammad Asim, MBE, the chair of Mosques and Imams National Advisory Board, the Most Reverend Justin Welby, Archbishop of Canterbury, and Chief Rabbi Sir Ephraim Mervis. So they're the big three. And then we've got Julie Siddiqui, MBE, Dilwar Hussain, MBE, and chair of New Horizons in British Islam, Imam Asif Hafiz, OBE, Rabbi Jonathan Wittenberg, OBE, Rabbi Charlie Baginski and Rabbi Josh Levy, co-leads of Progressive Judaism, and Rabbi Pinchas Hackenbroch, which is a great name.
Yeah, wonderful.
Chair of the Rabbinical Council of the United Synagogue. So there's a lot of names in there. Obviously, we'll want to focus on the main three because they're actually sort of separated by a line. So the main three, Imam Kari Muhammad Asim, Archbishop Justin Welby, and Chief Rabbi Ephraim Mervis, are sort of the big three that are separated off from the other ones because they're kind of considered, more important, basically.
Yeah, and I will note that two of the three of them are the heads of organisations that are explicitly homophobic. So that's Welby, obviously, and the Chief Rabbi, Ephraim Mervis. I see a lot of stuff about Ephraim Mervis come through, and I get it because he's the Chief Rabbi. Although it's worth saying that doesn't mean he's the Chief Rabbi of all Judaism in the same way that Welby is not head of all Christianity.
That's why you've got other rabbis at the bottom, right? Like,
but anyway, but actually, Mervis is both a staunch Zionist and a real conservative religiously. His most controversial progressive act was that he said that women should be allowed to pray together at synagogues as long as they don't read from the Torah themselves. That's genuinely true.
Whoa.
So
that's a bit far, isn't it?
Yeah. So, actually, it's funny because he's put forward as this voice of Judaism, he's welcomed onto kind of liberal media platforms to talk about anti-Semitism and Israel and Gaza and all the rest of it. But it's very rarely mentioned that he has some deeply regressive views that really have no place in a modern society.
I mean, I think that's, frankly, I mean, you're absolutely right. He does have some deeply regressive views, but sorry, I'm probably interjecting too early there, but I'm just ready to go.
No, go.
So he has deeply regressive views, always has. He's always been deeply Zionist, but with what's been going on over the last year, it's become really, really obvious and outspoken. So we can see a lot of this. He's always had these things before the last year. One of the things that I note is that he said that Jeremy Corbyn wasn't fit to be the
Yep.
leader of...
So Mervis is the only competitor with Tony Blair for the person who has the most common rare interventions into politics.
Yeah.
Because Mervis regularly does the thing where he says, as chief rabbi, it's not really my place to comment on politics. However, but actually, particularly the Corbyn thing, he specifically said it is long custom that chief rabbi does not comment on party political matters. But in this case, I've got to break that rule and say, I don't want to pay any more tax. Thanks, Jeremy, but no.
Which is what you can read between the lines.
Yeah, that was one of his specific words, yeah. I just assume that anyone who comes out and does that and is rich is saying that, like...
Yeah.
Please don't fix the NHS.
Yeah. But basically, he said that Jeremy Corbyn was an anti-Semite, and he said the very soul of our nation is at stake, and the overwhelming majority of British Jews are gripped by anxiety, i.e., if Labour won and Corbyn became Prime Minister.
And as always, I don't agree with fighting your political battles through the courts, but man, it is crazy that no one wants to call Ronaldo a rapist in the newspaper, but they'll happily call Jeremy Corbyn an anti-Semite. Like, you guys should be more scared, because if he ever decides to start suing, there's a lot of newspapers that are in a lot of trouble.
He does sue occasionally.
Yeah, very rarely.
Corbyn? Very occasionally, but like he could sue a lot of people.
Yeah.
But yeah, so that is the least of it. So over the last year, he has just outwardly supported a genocide consistently.
Yeah.
He said, we can be proud of the state of Israel, what it represents. What Israel is doing is the most outstanding thing a decent, responsible country can do for its citizens. That is talking specifically about the genocide in Gaza that's been going on for the last year. And he called the soldiers committing it our heroes, and expressed his hope that they would succeed in their mission. He prayed for the war to end, but said it has to be over in a successful way. And he repeated that a number of times. It has to be over in a successful way, i.e. Israel must win, and whatever that looks like. And yet it's still, according to him, a perverse moral inversion that tears open the still gaping wound of the Holocaust to call what Israel is doing a genocide. By the way, do you know where Ephraim Mervis is from?
I do. He is, of course, ding, 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 a white South African.
Yeah. Apparently, his parents were anti-apartheid. So
yeah, amazing how
his parents.
Yeah, amazing how everyone's parents is, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's crazy. It's almost like there was no one who supported apartheid in South Africa. Oh, there you go.
Incredible. And good. I'm glad his parents were anti-apartheid, but clearly Ephraim Mervis.
Yeah, didn't get the message. Yeah, and I think it's I think that's really interesting that it highlights for me what there isn't in this letter, which is any suggestion that the war should end at all. It says that we should mourn, that it's sad, but actually nothing about bringing it to an end. And that's because actually you wouldn't be able to get a united statement on that. Even a thing as simple as the killing should stop, actually, at the very least, Ephraim Mervis would not put his name to it. Yeah. I don't know about other people on that list. I don't know about Welby, frankly. But, even something as simple as a ceasefire, it's a call for mourning, a call to recognise the sadness, but it's devoid of any actual content of what they would like to happen, what should happen.
It's pointless.
It really is.
Absolutely pointless. Right. And I think this is this is often the thing about sort of liberal ways of talking about situations like this, is that they don't have any moral courage whatsoever. Mm-hmm. You end up in this place where you can't actually say anything because you're so obsessed with putting out joint statements and so on, that all you can do is impotently call for peace in a general sense and say that, and the best you'll get is that people on both, both sides need to stop fighting, right? Which completely puts under the carpet the entire context of what's been going on now for over 75 years.
Yeah, absolutely. So, acknowledging that response is completely useless, in a minute we're going to try and think about what a more useful religious response to what's going on might be. However, before we get to that, Adam, I believe you have a Saint of the Week for us.
Saint of the Week.
So I'm going to. We have done this before, but I think it is a bit of a departure from tradition for us, because I'm actually going to put forward an actual official saint for Saint of the Week.
Controversial, but let's see where it goes.
So I'm going to talk about Saint John Chrysostom, who you may have heard of. He's quite a famous one. Unusually for someone who was a church father in the patristic period, so he lived 347 to 407 ish. We have quite a lot of his writings still. So, for example, I have this book. This is probably his most famous book. It's called On the Priesthood. It's actually 6 books, because books in sort of ancient world was kind of like what we would call either a chapter or an essay now. So it kind of is one book with 6 chapters, but they call them books. And John Chrysostom, I find him a really fascinating guy, because he ran away. So back then, right, we're talking about a time when it, on and off, I think sometimes Christians can overemphasize this, but there was on and off, obviously, persecution, including executions and that kind of thing, of Christians at various times. So it could be quite dangerous to be a Christian, let alone a priest or a bishop. Of course, by this time, it has become the official religion of the Roman Empire, so it's less dangerous than it would be. But a big part of the reason John Chrysostom didn't want to become a priest was that he had a... So you'd hate this, Ben. He had a really high understanding of what it meant to be a priest. You know,
I'm already putting him off Saint of the Week.
Well, I think in his defense, he was kind of insisting that priests need to be better than they often are, frankly. And he felt that it was actually quite a dangerous thing to be, kind of spiritually, almost sort of existentially. And basically he ran away, because what would happen is that they would make you a priest. They would insist that you became a priest, and they would basically drag you to the place and make you a priest, right? It wasn't that you these days you go and visit your priest and you say, I think the Lord is calling me to be a priest, and then you get put through this really long process. I mean, for some people it's not that long. For some people it takes about 6 months. That's rare, but if you're a middle class person with a couple of degrees and you say the right things, you're going to get through pretty quickly. If you're me, it will take you 10 years and then they'll kick you out. But back then it was a different understanding of what it meant, and so he ran away to avoid being made a priest. Anyway, eventually it caught up with him and he was made one, and eventually was made bishop as well. He was known for being a really powerful orator, like a really powerful speaker. And the word Chrysostom actually means golden mouth, or the golden mouthed. So he was John Golden Mouth because he spoke so well, apparently. I want to give you an idea of some of the things that he believed. So in line with almost all other, certainly church fathers and mothers, he believed in the redistribution of wealth. He sort of denounced private property, basically, to the point of actually, at times, personal property as well. He was very, very communal, believed that everyone, Christians should hold everything in common, sort of echoing the Acts 2 and 4 kind of Christianity. And he just consistently condemned the rich. I mean, that's the thing I love about a lot of these church fathers and church mothers, is that they just are always slagging off the rich. I'll give you a few of his quotes, shall I? So he gave a reason for constantly attacking the rich. And he said, I am often reproached for continually attacking the rich. Yes, because the rich are continually attacking the poor. But those I attack are not the rich as such, only those who misuse their wealth. I point out constantly that those I accuse are not the rich, but the rapacious. Wealth is one thing, covetousness another. Learn to distinguish. Now, I don't think that is as good a quote as many of the other church fathers. But I think what's interesting about it is that whilst you're going to get some people who decide to use that in a way to say, well, we can be rich, it's fine. I don't actually think that that's what he's saying here. I think what he's saying, it's heavily implied because he attacks the rich and then saying, well, it's actually those who misuse their wealth. I think what he's implying here is that actually the rich all misuse their wealth, right? I don't think he's actually saying that it's okay to be rich because he's constantly attacking the rich. He's clearly kind of assumed that it doesn't matter, actually, that if you are rich, you're going to be rapacious, you're going to be covetous. So I think that's a really important kind of clarification there. And so some of the stuff he said after that clarification, he said the rich are in possession of the goods of the poor, even if they have acquired them honestly or inherited them legally, right? So you can see what I mean about how, even though he sort of clarified, when you look at that quote, there's no, you know, so we have to be able to use the context there. The rich man is a thief unless he gives his wealth away. The poor are dying from hunger while you have plenty of food. And if you do not share, you are killing your neighbor, right? So clearly a very, what we would now today consider a very sort of socialist kind of ethic.
Yeah. And what I like about that is the way that he's using that religious language to say, okay, forget the legalities of it. Forget what's like, what the law might say, and, I'm legally justified in doing this. Actually, morally speaking, that is stolen. Not in a legal sense, but in a moral sense, and using that religious language to say, actually, there's another set of values by which it can be judged.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that is a common thread, actually, again, in the writings of the fathers and mothers, that there is this distinction to be made between legality and the sort of higher set of values that Christians are called to. That's a fairly consistent. I mean, you see it in people like Augustine, who obviously is, a lot of people have a very complicated relationship with Augustine. But one of the interesting things about Saint Augustine is that he said that, I'm just pulling this out of out of nowhere, so if I get anything wrong, but he said that states have the right to execute criminals. However, as Christians, we have the responsibility, the duty to urge them not to.
Yeah,
which I think is a fascinating distinction that he's making there. I think I'm not sure I agree with that. I think
I don't think Augustine's making Saint of the Week anytime soon. No.
No. Look, I mean, Augustine's an interesting guy. Obviously, got some incredible stuff that you should read Augustine, but he's not going to be Saint of the Week on our podcast. And of course, look, we're talking about people who lived over 1,500 years ago. So there are going to be things that are, to our ears, odd or something that we would strongly disagree with. But some of these sort of socialist ethics have been there since well before these guys even. Obviously I mentioned Acts 2 and 4. You can see it in there. But throughout the patristic period, you can see consistently in the writings of a lot of these people all of this stuff. And they say it in ways, and part of the reason I wanted to do John Chrysostom is that they say this stuff very directly.
Yeah.
In ways that people are scared to in church now. If you heard a priest talking like this at the front of church now, you would expect complaints to go to the bishop. But that's what Christianity was back then. It's not to say it wasn't, as internally diverse as it is today. Of course it was. But this was the norm. And I think in the context of what we're talking about today, where we've got religious figures and Christian figures being mealy mouthed and coming up with sort of these aphorisms and so on about sort of generally saying, oh well, we want peace and so on, but Israel has the right to defend itself, but we want peace. Take a leaf out of John Chrysostom's book. Take a leaf out of Basil of Caesarea's book. Take a leaf out of even St. Augustine's book and say it like it is. Let's be honest and have some moral courage about it. So, yes, that's why I wanted to talk about John Chrysostom today. And there he is, our Saint of the Week for this week.
Saint of the week.
I think that probably does tie in nicely to what I want to talk about. Arguably, say what's really happening, don't be moral coward is the kind of key theme of this episode across all the segments, right? Like that's seems to be the thing that we keep coming back to. So we want to talk a little bit about actually, if that letter is, as we said, basically useless with nothing to say, actually what is a correct Christian response to what's going on? And I think, obviously the short answer is protest, get involved in Palestinian solidarity, try and support the BDS movement, take part in those kind of fundamentally secular campaigns that are happening. Those are obviously really important things to do. But we want to talk a little bit more specifically about actually what is the kind of Christian response that is specific to being a Christian. So something that we've been reflecting on is a piece written by Sarojini Nadar. I think that's how it's pronounced. Apologies if it's not. And we'll link to it in the show notes, but it's a piece about prayers for peace and kind of neutral prayers. And it draws upon the kind of history of Desmond Tutu in fighting apartheid in South Africa to talk about actually the ways in which prayers for peace and prayers that are neutral are basically a bit useless. And it was really interesting to reflect upon actually her suggestions of what it looks like to pray in ways that are honest, truthful, and I guess, courageous as opposed to cowardly. So yeah, and actually, I suppose I was struck by, as you were saying, Adam, you'd be shocked if someone stood up the front of church and said the things that your Saint of the Week said, but actually, why are we not having people stand up at the front of churches and pray for peace that includes justice? Why not have truth in our church services?
Yeah, and I would go a step further than that as well, actually. It's not simply a case of why not have truth or justice or whatever in our church services. It's that we are required to do so. It's not a case of why not. It's a case of we must do this. We are called to do this. We are called to speak with truth, with moral clarity, with that kind of thing. And, obviously we want to be careful about the sort of Christianity can be sort of over moralizing a lot of the time. But I think there's a difference between moralizing about what often people do moralize about, which is individual behaviors. Basically, a lot of the time, are you having sex before marriage? Or so often it's about sex, something like that. We talk about these personal behaviors, but we're very, very hesitant to talk about clear abrogations of responsibility, about clear injustice, about clear, a genocide. What is clearly a genocide, what is clearly a rogue state run by not just one. I mean, I think sometimes we can, yes, Netanyahu is a very, very important factor in this, given his personal situation. As soon as this stops, he's not going to have a good time, potentially. But actually, the fact that Israel they're run by the most right-wing government they've ever had, and that is saying something for Israel.
Yeah.
Like, they've always, more or less always been a fascist state, but they are well beyond anything that they've had since their founding. And it is absolutely incumbent on all of us, especially those of us in power, to not only call that out, but to put ourselves on the line to stop it. And the lack of moral courage, of moral leadership, of all that kind of thing from our religious leaders, from our church leaders, it's a struggle to find the right words to describe what I think of that. But I think Desmond Tutu puts it well. He says you have to take sides, and when you don't take sides, when you say I am a neutral, you have made a decision and you've decided to be on the side of the powerful. You've already made a choice. And so if we take that as our first sort of principle on this, what we have to say is our religious leaders, including Justin Welby, obviously including people like Ephraim Mervis, have chosen to be on the side of the oppressors, have chosen to be on the side of a fascist state that is committing a genocide. And that makes them genocide apologists. At the very least, it makes them complicit. And Desmond Tutu says that. Desmond Tutu says that if that's the position you take, you are complicit.
I think that's hard to argue with, really. And so I guess I just want to finish by thinking a little bit about in what ways we as Christians individually might choose not to be complicit, because I think that's really important. In terms of within churches, I think we all default to doing prayers of peace, but if, depending on your church context, if you have the opportunity to pray, whether that's within the service or within some sort of group, or writing prayers for newsletters, anything like that, actually trying to take the opportunity to be real honest with those prayers, and pray for the end of oppression, pray that a genocide is stopped, pray that the leaders of our country do the right thing and stop providing weapons to genocidal states. I'll be blunt with you, you're probably going to get yourself in some trouble unless you're in a really good church. But it's worth having a go.
This is something that Sarojini Nadar or Nadar, I'm not sure, says in her final point, where she's talking about what the alternative is. She says that, of course, we need to hold space. And this is a really important point. We absolutely do need to hold space for the humanity of both the oppressed and the oppressor. And I think that, ties into a sort of fairly fundamental aspect of liberation theology, because, of course, Sarojini Nadar is a liberation theologian. And it ties into this idea that the oppressor, by dehumanizing the oppressed or the other, is also dehumanizing themselves. So that's obviously an implicit point, an implicit value in what she's saying here. So we have to hold space for the humanity of both the oppressed and the oppressor, but we have to do so recognizing the suffering, whilst held deeply by both oppressor and oppressed, is rooted fundamentally in radically different realities. And so we have to we have to pray not to conflate their experiences as neutral prayers do, but to acknowledge the supremacy that underpins the oppression and fuels injustice, which is a really important point, because so much of what we see in this letter and in the rhetoric around what's going on with Israel constantly draws a false equivalence between the oppressors and the oppressed, right? Between even if we sort of acknowledge the violence of Hamas on October the 7th, and before that, yes, they commit acts of violence, but it's a false equivalence to say that violence is the same violence that Israel commits against the Palestinian people and has been committing since its founding and arguably before. You cannot equate the violence of someone who is attacking someone with the violence of someone who responds to being attacked by someone. That's just stupid, and there's so much there's so much of this in what we hear, what we're told about what's going on, and we absolutely have to challenge it, and we have to challenge it in our prayers. And one last thing on that, I've, for the last however many months, for various reasons, I have been attending church services in lots of different churches. I've just been going around to see what's what, see what I like, and which is something I like to do from time to time. And I went to a church recently where the guy leading prayers, the prayer actually came across as if it wasn't even quite neutral, as if this guy sort of sided with Israel. He didn't mention Palestine at all. He did mention Israel. He framed it very much, I can't remember exactly what he said, but basically he framed it very much as pro-Israel. right? And sort of anti-Palestinian, not necessarily pro-apartheid, but, Israel has the right to defend itself, all that kind of thing. That was what this prayer came across like. And the fascinating thing is I had a chat with him afterwards. And the first thing I noticed about him was that he had a Palestine flag on his lapel.
Oh.
Yeah. And we had a good chat. And I realized he is not pro-Israel, right? He is very aware. He's been to Palestine. He is very aware of what's going on and has been going on for decades. And he tries to be supportive of the Palestinian cause. But something about being in church, feeling like you have to watch your words and appeal to everyone, and it makes you say things that you wouldn't ordinarily say.
And I know for myself that I've felt that pressure and I've done it, because you think, well, is this a place to be political? Want to be careful, don't upset people, and those are laudable concerns in some ways, but how they actually pan out some of the time is in this situation where you avoid saying anything of real substance and real value, and you avoid that call to do the right thing and speak out against injustice. But it's really tough, because even if you've got a church that feels supportive, that probably would be okay with it, there are just this sense of, I don't know if it's decorum or the right thing to do or whatever it is, but something just weighing on you that says, "Oh, do you want to say that? Be careful. Oh, this is dangerous road to go down. Oh, you don't want to get political in church." All that sort of stuff. And so I think we do want to acknowledge that it's really tough, but that actually it's probably really important.
Yeah, church was never meant to be a neutral space, right? It was always meant to be a place where injustice was challenged, right? Where you went and you were told truth, whether that was comfortable or uncomfortable. And this is not just a problem of the established church, but it is a problem of a church in general that has become complicit with the state.
Yeah.
It has become something that is quite happy to go along with the proclamations of the state of the society that it's in.
And I think it's important to say here that there was an established church, but actually pretty much the entire Christian church in this country of all denominations is part of the establishment. That's what we're trying to say here, is that actually, regardless of the formal status of individual denominations, the Christian church is part of the establishment in this country.
And there's a sense in which, I think we have to be careful about calling the church to be countercultural and all the rest of it, because
it means homophobia a lot of time, doesn't it?
Like you and I have both sort of had our experiences with those kinds of churches, those kinds of spaces where words like countercultural, and the one that I love is when churches think that they're radical. It's radical to, and they're just not. They're just not. Let's stop that. Another one. It sort of reminds me. There's some churches where. And I'm not saying this to be mean. It just sort of makes me laugh, and it made me laugh at the time. But I've been in churches where they're very sort of charismatic and very kind of, they have their modern, contemporary Christian music, and a lot of the young people, especially, will go to the front and they'll bounce, they'll have dance and have fun. And I always found it so funny that a lot of people in the church would call this the mosh pit. And I don't know if you've ever been in a mosh pit, Ben.
Not in a while, not in a long time.
Yeah. And certainly not at church.
No.
I'm sure there are churches that have legitimate mosh pits.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, there's a
church
bound to be one somewhere, right? Yeah. This was not it. But yeah, there's something about churches taking these words and applying them to what they're already doing, rather than what they should already be doing, and thinking that they are somehow doing something that is radically different, literally radically different to what's already going on. And actually, no, it just reflects the society that it's in.
Yeah. So that's your call for our episode this week, is to go and try and actually be radical
Start a mosh pit in church.
Start a mosh pit. Pray for justice, not just peace. I do want to flag up to people, if you are someone with a bit more kind of standing power, whatever, in your church community, that you're able to kind of, put forward certain resources in whatever way. Maybe you run a small group, or, whatever it might look like. Sabile Kairos have a bunch of resources that you can go and have a gander at. There's some really good stuff there that, for things like small groups, potentially, depending on the type of church, there's stuff that you could use in services, or whatever else you think. I would say, none of us are able to kick Keir Starmer in the shins until he stops allowing exports of arms to Israel, but actually a lot of us probably are in situations where we can do smaller things within our church communities that just change some of that narrative and challenge some of those assumptions, and are, I guess, ultimately what we're called to do as Christians.
And it's as simple as naming it, calling it what it is,
which is a genocide.
Which is a genocide, and an apartheid, and an occupation. That's just factually what it is. And if people have a problem with that, you can point them to numerous statements from organizations like the UN that recognize that it is, certainly they recognize that it's apartheid.
Yeah.
And obviously the International Court of Justice is still deliberating on the genocide issue. But then multiple organizations, multiple charities, multiple human rights organizations, that kind of thing, have fairly consistently called these things what they are. So you can point to those, and be ready to have those uncomfortable conversations. That we have to. That's the nature of it. That's what we're called to do.
So thank you very much for listening to the episode today. We've referenced a few things. We'll shove them in the show notes for you all so you can access them there. Adam, where in the world can people find you?
You can find me Twitter, TikTok. They're the main ones at the moment, at CommieXIAN.
Brilliant. And if you want to find the podcast, you go breadandrosaries.com. All of our links are available there and in the show notes and all the other place. We love to hear from people. So if you've got any thoughts, feedback, suggestions, comments, etc., please do get in touch. You
can text us as well.
That's true. You can text us.
There's a text link at the top of the show notes.
If that text us, floats your boat, then text away. Adam says you can text us. Unless you already have our phone numbers, you're not getting our phone. We don't just give out our phone numbers. I'll give Adam's out, but mine is mine is secret, so you can't have that. But you can send us a text that will come to us as an email, which I guess ultimately you could just email us. But you've got lots of options. So get in contact if you would like. Right, I think that's us for the week. Thank you very much for joining us. You can find us in all the usual podcast feedy places. Why not review us? Send us to your friends. Annoy your aunt by saying, "Hey aunt, I think you do like this podcast." All that important promotional stuff that we can do.
And we're even on YouTube now. So
which I'm unhappy about. Thank you very much for listening. Thank you for joining me, Adam, and we'll see you next time.
See you later.
Bye.